The thunderous roar of the Verde River drowned Theodora Lawrence's screams as her wagon careened sideways into the rushing waters, the force of the current immediately tipping it onto its side with a sickening crack. April 1875 had brought unusually heavy spring rains to Arizona Territory, transforming the normally placid crossing into a deadly trap that had claimed more than one settler's life already this season. Flynn Harrington reined his stallion to an abrupt halt at the river's edge, his heart stopping at the sight of the woman's terrified face as she clung desperately to the wagon's frame, the muddy waters already rising around her. Without a second thought, he leapt from his horse, shed his duster, and plunged into the frigid current. "Hold on," he shouted, fighting against the river's pull as he swam toward her. The wagon was sinking fast, her trunks and supplies already being carried downstream. She was a stranger to him, but that didn't matter, not out here where survival often depended on the kindness of those you'd never met. Theodora could feel her grip weakening, her fingers numb from the cold water and the strain of holding on. Her entire life was disappearing before her eyes, the wagon that had carried her from Boston, the teaching supplies she'd brought for her new position, the letters of introduction, all of it gone. And now, quite possibly, her life would follow. Just as her fingers slipped from the wooden frame, strong arms encircled her waist. The stranger's face was close to hers now, his expression determined as he pulled her away from the sinking wagon. "Kick your feet." He commanded, and she obeyed instinctively, though her sodden skirts made movement nearly impossible. Together they fought the current, inch by painful inch, until finally, miraculously, Flynn's boots found purchase on the riverbed. With a mighty effort, he hauled them both to shore, collapsing onto the muddy bank with Theodora still clutched against his chest. For several moments they simply lay there, gasping for breath, the enormity of what had just happened washing over them like the river water that had nearly claimed Theodora's life. "Thank you," she finally managed between chattering teeth. "I would have, don't mention it," Flynn cut her off, not wanting to hear her acknowledge how close she'd come to drowning. He sat up slowly, helping her to a sitting position as well. "Flynn Harrington," he introduced himself, pushing back his soaked dark hair from his forehead. "Foreman at the Triple R Ranch just north of Ash Fork." "Theodora Lawrence," she replied, attempting to wring water from her sleeve with trembling hands. I am to be the new school teacher in Ash Fork." Flynn's expression softened. The town had been waiting for a proper school teacher for months now. "Well, Miss Lawrence, seems you've had quite the welcome to Arizona Territory." A half-hysterical laugh escaped her lips. "Yes, quite, and now I've lost everything. My clothes, my books, the school supplies." Her voice broke as the reality of her situation hit her anew. Flynn stood and offered his hand, pulling her to her feet. "First things first, we need to get you warm and dry before you catch your death. My ranch is closer than town. We can head there, get you some dry clothes, and figure out what's next." Theodora hesitated only briefly before nodding. What choice did she have? Her entire future had just washed downstream, and this stranger, this cowboy, was offering the only lifeline she had left. Flynn whistled sharply, and his horse trotted over obediently. "This is Thunder," he said, patting the stallion's neck. "He's strong enough to carry us both back to the ranch." With unexpected gentleness for a man of his size and obvious strength, Flynn helped Theodora mount the horse before swinging up behind her. She stiffened slightly at the intimacy of their position, her back pressed against his chest, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins, but the warmth of him behind her was undeniable comfort against the chill that had settled into her bones. "Hang on," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as he urged Thunder forward. As they rode, Theodora tried to maintain her composure, but tears mingled with the river water on her cheeks. 24 years of life, and everything she owned was now at the bottom of the Verde River or floating toward California. 6 months of saving for this journey, of planning her new life, gone in an instant. Flynn sensed her silent weeping and wisely said nothing, simply guiding his horse along the trail with steady hands. The silence between them was filled only by the rhythmic sound of thunder's hooves and the occasional call of a bird overhead. After about 20 minutes of riding, the Triple R Ranch came into view, a sprawling property nestled against the backdrop of distant red rock formations. The main house was larger than Theodora had expected, a two-story structure of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a bunkhouse stood a short distance away. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Her expression quickly changed from curiosity to concern as she took in their bedraggled appearance. "Flynn Harrington, what in heaven's name?" she began, hurrying down the porch steps. "River accident, Mrs. Mullins," Flynn explained, dismounting before carefully helping Theodora down. "This is Miss Lawrence, the new schoolteacher for Ash Fork. Her wagon overturned at the crossing. Mrs. Mullins, a plump, motherly woman with graying hair, immediately took charge, clucking sympathetically as she ushered Theodora toward the house. "You poor dear, come inside at once. We'll get you dry clothes and something hot to drink." Theodora glanced back at Flynn, suddenly reluctant to be separated from her rescuer. He offered a reassuring nod. "I'll see to Thunder and be right in. You're in good hands with Mrs. Mullins." Inside the house, Theodora was led to a bedroom on the second floor where Mrs. Mullins efficiently helped her out of her sodden garments and into a borrowed nightgown and robe. "These belonged to Mr. Harrington's sister," Mrs. Mullins explained as she helped Theodora into the dry clothes. "She visits occasionally, but is back east now." "Mr. Harrington saved my life," Theodora said softly, the reality of it still sinking in. "If he hadn't been there." "That's our Flynn," Mrs. Mullins said with obvious affection. "Heart as big as the Arizona sky, though he'd never admit it. Now, let's get you downstairs by the fire with some hot tea." Wrapped in the borrowed robe, her damp hair combed and braided by Mrs. Mullins' capable hands, Theodora was settled into a comfortable chair near the fireplace in the ranch's spacious living room. A steaming cup of tea was placed in her hands, and a woolen blanket tucked around her legs. Flynn entered shortly after, having changed into dry clothes himself. His dark hair was still damp, curling slightly at the ends, and Theodora noticed for the first time how striking his features were: strong jawline, straight nose, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, yet there was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged appearance. "Feeling any better?" he asked, taking a seat opposite her. "Yes, thank you," she replied, managing a small smile. "Though I'm not sure what I'm going to do now. Everything I brought with me is gone." Flynn leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We'll send some men to search downstream tomorrow, might be able to recover some of your things." "That's very kind, but no buts," he interrupted with a gentle firmness. "That's how we do things out here. Neighbors help neighbors. I'm not your neighbor, Mr. Harrington. I'm a stranger who's imposed on your hospitality." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Everyone's a stranger until they're not, Miss Lawrence." Something in his direct gaze made Theodora's heart flutter unexpectedly. She attributed it to the lingering shock of her near drowning and quickly returned her attention to her tea. "Mrs. Mullins says you're the foreman here." "Is this your ranch?" she asked, changing the subject. Flynn shook his head. "It belongs to Richard Reynolds, hence the Triple R. He's back east on business most of the time, leaves me to run things." There was pride in his voice, and Theodora could tell he took his responsibilities seriously. "And you're from?" "Originally, Texas, came out this way after the war looking for a fresh start." His expression darkened momentarily, and Theodora sensed there was more to that story, but she didn't press. "I'm from Boston," she offered instead. "I've never been west of the Mississippi before this journey." Flynn's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a change. What brought you all the way to Ash Fork?" Theodora hesitated, memories of what she'd left behind flashing through her mind. A position was advertised for a schoolteacher. "I have my teaching certificate and needed a change." She left out the part about a broken engagement and the scandal that had followed when her fiancé had jilted her for her own cousin. Some things were better left unsaid, especially to a man she'd just met, no matter how kind he'd been. "Well, Ash Fork desperately needs a teacher," Flynn said. "The children have been making do with Mrs. Peterson, the preacher's wife, but she's expecting and can't continue much longer." Theodora's spirits lifted slightly at this confirmation that her position was still waiting for her. At least that part of her plan remained intact. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Mullins announcing that dinner was ready. Flynn insisted that Theodora join them at the table, despite her protests about imposing further. "You need to eat," he said firmly. "Doctor's orders." "Are you a doctor as well as a ranch foreman?" she asked with a raised eyebrow, the corner of his mouth quirked up. "No, madam, but I've seen enough river accidents to know that a hot meal is the best medicine after a dunking like you had." Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Theodora found her appetite returning as she ate, and by the end of the meal, some color had returned to her cheeks. Throughout dinner, Flynn shared stories about the ranch and the area, clearly trying to put her at ease. She learned that he'd been working at the R for 5 years and had been foreman for the last 3. He spoke of the challenges of ranching in the territory drought, cattle rustlers, and the occasional conflict with native tribes, but also of the beauty of the land and the satisfaction of watching a herd thrive under his care. Theodora found herself captivated by his tales and by the man himself. There was an honesty to Flynn Harrington, a straightforwardness that was refreshing after the polite deceits of Boston society. After dinner, despite Mrs. Mullins' insistence that she should rest, Theodora helped clear the table. "I'm not an invalid," she insisted. "And I'd like to earn my keep, even if just for one night." "You'll be staying longer than that," Flynn said as he stacked plates. At Theodora's startled look, he clarified, "At least until we can get word to town and make arrangements. The river's too dangerous to cross today, and even once it's passable, you'll need supplies before you can settle in Ash Fork." The practicality of his assessment was undeniable, but Theodora still felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of staying at a ranch with a man she barely knew, no matter how honorable he seemed. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Mullins patted her arm. "Don't you worry, dear. I live in the little cottage just behind the main house you saw it when you arrived. I'll be right nearby, and no one would dare question your reputation with me as chaperone." She shot Flynn a look that clearly said she'd be watching him too, which made Theodora smile despite herself. That night, lying in the comfortable bed in what had been Flynn's sister's room, Theodora found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her journey had taken. When she'd left Boston, she'd been running from heartbreak and humiliation, seeking anonymity in a distant territory where no one would know her story. Now, on her first day in Arizona, she'd nearly died and been rescued by a man unlike any she'd ever known. Flynn Harrington was nothing like the refined gentleman of Boston society. His hands were calloused from hard work, his face weathered by sun and wind. Yet there was a dignity to him, an inherent kindness that she found herself drawn to. And those eyes so blue and direct, looking at her as if he could see right through the carefully constructed facade she'd maintained since Thomas Henderson had broken her heart and her trust 6 months ago. Theodora pushed the thought away. She was being fanciful, no doubt due to the trauma of the day's events. Flynn had simply been a good Samaritan, doing what any decent person would do. Once she was settled in Ash Fork, their paths would rarely cross, and today would become nothing more than an anecdote, a dramatic beginning to her Western adventure. With that sensible thought, she closed her eyes and fell into an exhausted sleep, too tired even to dream. Morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the curtains of Theodora's borrowed room. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. This wasn't the hotel in Prescott where she'd spent the previous night, nor was it the wagon that had been her home for the final leg of her journey. Then memory flooded back the river, the accident, Flynn diving in to save her. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Mullins' entrance, carrying a tray with coffee and toast. "Good morning, dear. How are you feeling today?" Theodora sat up, running a hand over her hair which had come loose from its braid during the night. Much better, thank you, though I'm afraid I've slept rather late. Mrs. Mullins set the tray on the bedside table. Nonsense. It's barely past 7, and you needed the rest after yesterday's ordeal. She moved to the wardrobe and removed a simple dress. I've altered one of Miss Harrington's dresses for you. It might be a bit long, but it should do until we can get you some proper clothes. You've been too kind, Theodora said, genuinely touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. I don't know how I can repay you. No need for that. Now, once you're dressed, come down for a proper breakfast. Flynn's already been out checking the river. Says it's still running high, but might be crossable by tomorrow if no more rain comes. After Mrs. Mullins left, Theodora rose and dressed in the borrowed garments, a practical blue cotton dress, slightly faded but clean and well made. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The formal, buttoned-up schoolteacher from Boston seemed far away. Her normally neat hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and without her usual high collar and severe styling, she looked younger, less rigid. Downstairs, she found Flynn at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hand and a map spread out before him. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, something flashed in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation before his expression returned to its usual calm attentiveness. Morning, Miss Lawrence. Hope you slept well. Very well, thank you, she replied, taking the seat Mrs. Mullins indicated. I understand you've been to check the river. Flynn nodded, folding the map, still too high to cross safely. I've sent one of the hands, Miguel, to ride around the long way to Ash Fork. He'll let them know you're safe and will be delayed. Relief washed over her. Thank you. I wouldn't want them to think I'd abandoned my position before even starting. No chance of that, Flynn said with a small smile. Ash Fork's been waiting too long for a proper teacher to give up on one so easily. As Mrs. Mullins served a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, Flynn outlined his plan for the day. I've got 2 men searching downstream for any of your belongings that might have washed up. Meanwhile, I thought you might like a tour of the ranch if you're feeling up to it. The idea of spending the day in Flynn's company brought a warmth to Theodora's cheeks that she attributed to the hot coffee. That would be lovely, though I don't want to keep you from your work. Running the ranch is my work, he replied simply, and making sure our unexpected guest is comfortable falls under that heading. After breakfast, Flynn showed Theodora around the Triple R. She was impressed by the size and organization of the operation, hundreds of cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands, a dozen horses in the corral, several outbuildings for equipment and feed, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. How many men work here? She asked as they walked toward the stables. 8 full-time plus seasonal help during roundup and branding. Flynn tipped his hat to a weathered older man who passed them. That's Chester, been here longer than I have. Best tracker in 3 counties. Chester nodded politely to Theodora. Madam. Heard about your misfortune. River's a tricky beast in spring. Yes, I've learned that rather dramatically, she replied with a rueful smile. Glad Flynn was there, Chester said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Boys got a knack for being in the right place at the right time. As they continued their tour, Theodora found herself curious about Flynn's fortuitous appearance at the river crossing. Why were you there yesterday? She asked as they paused by the corral to watch a young cowhand breaking a spirited Mustang. Flynn leaned against the fence post. I was checking the southern pasture. We lost some calves to coyotes last week, so I've been riding the boundaries more often. He glanced at her. Lucky timing, I suppose. Very lucky, she agreed softly. The Mustang reared suddenly, nearly unseating its rider, and Theodora gasped. Flynn didn't flinch, his eyes calmly following the horse's movements. He'll be fine, Flynn assured her. That's Pete. He's got away with the wild ones. Sure enough, after a few more bucks and turns, the horse settled, trotting around the corral with Pete firmly in the saddle. Impressive, Theodora murmured. Takes patience, Flynn said. Can't rush trust, not with horses, not with people. The statement hung between them, laden with meaning Theodora wasn't ready to examine. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about the mountains visible in the distance. They spent the rest of the morning exploring the ranch property. Flynn was a knowledgeable guide, explaining the challenges and rewards of ranching in Arizona territory with a passion that was evident in every word. Theodora found herself fascinated not just by the information, but by the man himself, his deep connection to the land, his obvious respect for the men who worked for him, the way his face lit up when he spoke of future plans for the Triple R. By midday, they had returned to the main house for lunch. As they approached, they spotted a rider coming in fast from the direction of town. "That's Miguel," Flynn said, his brow furrowing slightly. "Back sooner than I expected." They waited as the young Mexican cowhand dismounted and approached, dust from the trail coating his clothes. "Senor Flynn," Miguel greeted him, removing his hat. "Miss Lawrence, I bring news from Ash Fork." "Good news, I hope," Flynn replied. Miguel shrugged. "The town is glad to hear you are safe, miss," he said to Theodora. "But there is problem with the school." Theodora's heart sank. "What sort of problem?" "The roof. It collapsed 2 days ago from all the rain. Mayor says it will take at least 3 weeks to rebuild." Flynn frowned. "Where were you supposed to stay in town, Miss Lawrence?" "There's a room above the school I was to use," she replied, dismayed by this new setback. "I suppose that's gone as well." Miguel nodded apologetically. All damaged. "Mayor Thornton says to tell you they still want you as teacher, but you must wait until repairs are done." Theodora felt her carefully laid plans crumbling further. First her belongings, now her accommodation and workplace. What was she to do for 3 weeks? She had precious little money left after the journey west, certainly not enough for a lengthy hotel stay. Flynn seemed to read her thoughts. "You're welcome to stay here until the school is repaired," he said without hesitation. "I couldn't possibly impose." "It's no imposition," Flynn interrupted. "We have the space, and Mrs. Mullins would appreciate the female company." He turned to Miguel. "Ride back tomorrow and tell Mayor Thornton that Miss Lawrence will be staying at the Triple R until the school is ready, and ask if any of her things were delivered to town ahead of her arrival." Miguel nodded, replacing his hat. "Senor, I will go first thing." As Miguel walked toward the bunkhouse for a well-deserved rest, Theodora turned to Flynn, uncertainty written across her face. "Mr. Harrington, I appreciate your offer, but I don't know if it's appropriate." "It's entirely appropriate," he assured her. "Mrs. Mullins is here as chaperone, and no one in these parts would think twice about neighbors helping in time of need." His expression softened. "Besides, what's the alternative? You can't cross the river yet, the school isn't ready, and the nearest hotel is in Prescott, a good day's ride away." Put that way, Theodora had to admit the logic of his suggestion. Still, the prospect of spending 3 weeks in close proximity to Flynn Harrington was unsettling in ways she couldn't quite define. There was something about him that made her feel both safe and somehow vulnerable, a contradiction that both intrigued and alarmed her. "Very well," she finally agreed, "but I insist on making myself useful while I'm here. I won't be a burden." A genuine smile spread across Flynn's face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Theodora's breath catch. "I wouldn't expect anything less from a woman who insists on helping with the dishes after nearly drowning." The next few days settled into an unexpected routine. With the river still too dangerous to cross, Theodora found herself adapting to life at the Triple R with surprising ease. True to her word, she insisted on helping with household tasks, assisting Mrs. Mullins with cooking and mending, and even organizing the ranch's account books, which Flynn admitted had been neglected in recent months. "You have a gift for figures," he remarked on her third evening as they sat at the dining room table reviewing the quarterly expenses. The lamp between them cast a warm glow over the papers spread across the polished surface. "My father was an accountant," Theodora explained, making a neat notation in the ledger. "He insisted I learn, said a woman should always be able to manage her own finances." "Wise man," Flynn commented, watching her hands move efficiently across the page. "Most men I know wouldn't bother teaching their daughters such things." "He wasn't like most men," she said softly, memories of her father dead now these past 2 years bringing a bittersweet pang. He believed women were just as capable as men, given the opportunity. "And you, what do you believe, Miss Lawrence?" Theodora looked up, meeting his curious gaze. In the lamplight, his eyes were a deeper blue, intent and searching. "I believe we all have gifts to offer, regardless of whether we wear trousers or skirts. Though I've found that expressing such opinions too boldly in Boston drawing rooms isn't always well received." A smile tugged at Flynn's mouth. "I suspect Boston's loss is Ash Fork's gain, then." The warmth in his voice brought a flush to Theodora's cheeks, and she quickly returned her attention to the ledger, hoping he hadn't noticed. By the end of the first week, the river had receded enough to be crossed safely. One of Flynn's men had managed to recover a few of Theodora's belongings, a trunk containing some clothing that had lodged against a sandbar, and remarkably, her father's pocket watch, which had somehow remained sealed in its waterproof case. "I thought this was lost forever," she said, tears welling in her eyes as Flynn presented it to her. They were standing on the porch, the setting sun painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. It was his most prized possession. "Chester found it caught in some reeds about a mile downstream," Flynn explained, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Said the case kept it dry as a bone." Impulsively, Theodora stepped forward and embraced him, overwhelmed by the return of this treasured memento. Flynn stiffened momentarily in surprise before his arms came around her, returning the embrace with gentle pressure. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "You're welcome, Theodora," he replied, using her given name for the first time. The moment stretched between them, intimate and charged with unspoken feelings, until Theodora suddenly realized the impropriety of her actions and stepped back, composing herself with effort. "Forgive me, Mr. Harrington, I shouldn't have." "Flynn," he interrupted quietly. "If I'm calling you Theodora, seems only fair you call me Flynn," she nodded, still flustered by her own boldness and by the lingering warmth of his arms around her. "Flynn, then, thank you again." That night, lying awake in bed, Theodora confronted the truth she'd been avoiding for days. She was falling in love with Flynn Harrington. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had come west to escape the pain of one broken heart, not to risk another. Flynn was kind, honorable, and undeniably attractive, but what did she really know about him? And more importantly, what did he feel for her beyond the obligation of a rescuer toward the rescued? The following day brought an unexpected development. Flynn announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into Prescott on business and would be gone overnight. "Would you like to come along?" he asked Theodora. "You could purchase some new supplies for your teaching position, and Mrs. Mullins mentioned you might need some additional clothing." The invitation surprised her. "Wouldn't I be in the way of your business?" "Not at all. I'm just meeting with the bank and checking on some breeding stock that's coming in by rail. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I thought you might appreciate a change of scenery after being cooped up at the ranch." Theodora hesitated only briefly. A trip to Prescott would be practical. She did need supplies and clothing, but she couldn't deny the appeal of spending more time in Flynn's company. "I'd be delighted," she finally said. They set out early the next morning, Flynn on Thunder and Theodora on a gentle mare named Daisy that Flynn assured her was perfect for an inexperienced rider. Mrs. Mullins had packed them a lunch, and Flynn carried saddlebags with essentials for the overnight stay. "We'll put up at the Palace Hotel," Flynn explained as they rode. "It's respectable and they know me there. We'll have separate rooms, of course." Theodora appreciated his consideration for her reputation, even as she wondered if his clarification was meant to reassure her or himself. The ride to Prescott took most of the day, but Theodora found she didn't mind. The Arizona landscape was stunning, vast open spaces punctuated by dramatic rock formations, stands of ponderosa pine, and wildflowers that dotted the grasslands with splashes of color. Flynn was an informative guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. "Have you always loved this land?" she asked as they stopped to rest the horses near a clear stream. Flynn considered the question, his gaze sweeping across the horizon. "Not always." When I first came west, I was running from things, didn't much care where I ended up as long as it was far from where I'd been. He looked at her, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. But this place gets under your skin, the openness of it, the honesty. Land like this doesn't lie to you or pretend to be something it's not. The personal nature of his answer touched her. Flynn rarely spoke of his past, and Theodora sensed there were painful memories there that he preferred not to disturb. "I think I understand," she said softly. "Boston can be suffocating in its politeness, everything hidden behind proper manners and correct behavior." "Is that why you left? To escape the suffocation?" Theodora hesitated, then decided that Flynn's honesty deserved her own in return. "Partly, but mostly I was running too. My former fiancé, broke our engagement rather publicly and rather cruelly." She looked down at her hands, twisted in Daisy's reins. "He announced at my own birthday celebration that he'd fallen in love with my cousin and they were to be married instead." Flynn's expression darkened. "That's a special kind of low." "Yes, well, the scandal was significant. Suddenly, I was no longer the respectable daughter of a good family, but an object of pity and gossip. Every sympathetic look, every whispered comment when I passed, it became unbearable." She met his gaze steadily. "So when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Arizona Territory, it seemed like divine providence. A chance to go somewhere no one knew my history, where I could be judged for my own merits rather than for having been jilted." "His loss," Flynn said simply, but the quiet intensity in his eyes made Theodora's heart beat faster. They reached Prescott by late afternoon, the territorial capital bustling with activity. After stabling their horses, Flynn escorted Theodora to the Palace Hotel, an impressive two-story structure on Montezuma Street. As promised, he secured separate rooms and arranged to meet her for dinner after she had rested and freshened up. Alone in her hotel room, the first real privacy she'd had since the accident, Theodora found her thoughts continually returning to Flynn. The man was becoming more than a rescuer or a temporary host. He was becoming essential to her in ways she hadn't anticipated and wasn't entirely prepared for. Dinner that evening was a pleasant affair in the hotel's dining room. Flynn had changed into clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, and Theodora was struck again by how handsome he was, not in the polished, manicured way of Boston gentlemen, but with a rugged authenticity that suited him perfectly. Their conversation flowed easily, covering topics from books they'd read to their hopes for the future. Flynn spoke of his dreams for the RRR expanding the breeding program, possibly purchasing adjacent land when the owner retired. "And what about you?" he asked, his expression genuinely interested. "Is teaching in Ash Fork a temporary stop or a permanent plan?" Theodora considered the question. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "When I left Boston, I was thinking only of escape, not of what might come after. Teaching is something I'm good at and enjoy, but whether Ash Fork becomes my home or merely a chapter in my story, I suppose that depends on what I find there." Or whom, she added silently, her eyes meeting Flynn's across the table. The next morning, they set about their respective errands, Flynn to the bank and the railroad station, Theodora to purchase clothing and teaching supplies. They agreed to meet for lunch before beginning the journey back to the ranch. Shopping was a welcome distraction, and Theodora found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of selecting new items for herself. With the money she'd managed to save from her travel funds, she purchased 2 new dresses, a pair of sturdy boots more suitable for Western life than her city shoes, and various personal necessities. She also bought basic school supplies, slates, chalk, primers, and a few books to replace those lost in the river. She was just leaving the mercantile when a commotion across the street caught her attention. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, voices raised in anger. To her horror, she recognized Flynn in the middle of the confrontation, facing off against a large, bearded man whose hand hovered dangerously near the pistol at his hip. "You've got no business in Prescott, Harrington," the man was saying loudly enough for bystanders to hear. "Not after what you did." Flynn's stance was relaxed but alert, his voice too low for Theodora to make out his reply. Whatever he said only seemed to anger the other man further. "My brother's dead because of you," the bearded man shouted, taking a step closer. Theodora watched, frozen in place, as tension vibrated through the growing crowd. Just as it seemed the situation would escalate to violence, the town sheriff pushed through the onlookers. "That's enough, Dawson," the lawman said firmly. "Take your grievances elsewhere or spend the night in my jail, your choice." For a moment, it seemed the man Dawson might ignore the warning. Then, with a final glare at Flynn, he spat on the ground and stalked back into the saloon. The sheriff exchanged a few words with Flynn before the crowd began to disperse. Theodora remained where she was, packages clutched to her chest, unsure whether to approach or pretend she hadn't witnessed the altercation. The decision was made for her when Flynn looked up and saw her standing there. A flash of something regret, embarrassment, crossed his face before he crossed the street to join her. "I see you found some supplies," he said, gesturing to her packages as if nothing unusual had just occurred. "Flynn," she began hesitantly, "that man, old history," he cut her off, his expression closing. "Nothing for you to worry about." But he said his brother, "Theodora, please." There was an edge to his voice now. "Some stories aren't mine to tell and others aren't worth telling." "Can we leave it at that?" She wanted to press further, curiosity and concern warring within her. But the set of Flynn's jaw told her this was a boundary he wasn't willing to cross, not now, perhaps not ever. "Of course," she conceded, though the incident left her with unsettling questions about the man who had saved her life. Their ride back to the Triple R was quieter than the journey to Prescott, the easy camaraderie of the previous day partially eclipsed by the shadow of the confrontation. Flynn was polite but distant, lost in thoughts he chose not to share, and Theodora respected his silence even as she longed to bridge the sudden gap between them. By the time they reached the ranch, evening was falling. Mrs. Mullins greeted them warmly, eager to hear about their trip and see Theodora's purchases. Flynn excused himself to check on a new calf that had been born during their absence, and Theodora felt his departure like a physical loss. Later that night, unable to sleep, she slipped outside to sit on the porch swing, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. The sky was a tapestry of stars, more brilliant than she'd ever seen in the city, and the vastness of it made her own troubles seem small by comparison. She didn't hear Flynn approach until he spoke. "Can't sleep." Startled, she turned to find him standing at the edge of the porch, hat in hand. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Mind if I join you?" At her gesture of welcome, he settled onto the swing beside her, careful to maintain a respectable distance. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, the only sound the creak of the swing's chains and the chorus of night insects. "I owe you an explanation," Flynn finally said, his voice low, "about what happened in town." "You don't owe me anything," Theodora replied, though her heart quickened at his willingness to share. Flynn sighed, looking out at the darkened ranch yard. Dawson's brother was a rustler. 3 years ago, he and his gang tried to steal a herd of Triple R cattle. There was a gunfight. I didn't fire the shot that killed him, but I was leading the men who did. He turned to look at her, his expression solemn. "I'm not proud of it, but I don't regret defending what was in my care." Theodora absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the gentle man beside her with someone who had participated in deadly violence. Yet she understood that life in the West operated by different rules than the drawing rooms of Boston. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "I wanted you to know," Flynn replied, his voice equally quiet. "Before you heard some twisted version from someone else, there are parts of my past that aren't pretty, things I did during and after the war that I wish I could change." He hesitated. "But I'm not that man anymore." "Haven't been for a long time." The vulnerability in his confession touched her deeply. Without thinking, Theodora reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the swing between them. "We all have regrets, Flynn, things we wish we'd done differently. But it's what we choose now, today, that defines us." His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong, and the simple connection felt more intimate than any embrace. "You're a remarkable woman, Theodora Lawrence," he murmured. They sat there together beneath the star-strewn sky, hands entwined, neither willing to break the moment with further words. Something fundamental had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a growing trust that transcended their brief acquaintance. When Theodora finally returned to her room, her heart was full of emotions she couldn't fully name. Flynn Harrington was becoming more than a rescuer or a friend. He was becoming a possibility, a future she hadn't dared to imagine when she'd set out from Boston. The days that followed brought them closer still. Flynn began teaching Theodora to ride properly, not just to sit a gentle mare, but to handle a more spirited mount with confidence. She proved an apt pupil, her initial nervousness giving way to genuine enjoyment as she mastered the basics of Western horsemanship. "You're a natural," Flynn told her one afternoon as they rode across a flowering meadow, Theodora now comfortable enough to manage her horse without constant instruction. "Give it a few more weeks, and you'll be ready to help with the roundup." She laughed, exhilarated by the freedom of riding across the open land. "I think the schoolchildren of Ash Fork might have something to say about that plan." Flynn's expression sobered slightly. "Speaking of which, Miguel brought news yesterday. The school repairs are coming along faster than expected. Should be ready in another 10 days or so." "Oh," Theodora said, her smile fading as she realized what that meant. Soon she would be leaving the Triple R, leaving the daily company of Flynn and the others who had become unexpectedly dear to her. "That's good news," Flynn studied her face. "Is it?" The simple question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Theodora found herself at a crossroads. Should she admit how reluctant she was to leave the ranch, to leave him? Or maintain the pretense that her stay was always meant to be temporary? Before she could decide, a shout from the distance interrupted them. One of the ranch hands was riding toward them at a gallop, urgency in his posture. "Flynn," the man called as he approached. "Chester sent me to find you. There's trouble at the north pasture. Looks like rustlers hit during the night. Took at least 20 head. Flynn's expression hardened instantly. "Anyone hurt?" "No, sir. Chester and Pete are tracking them now." Flynn turned to Theodora, conflict evident in his eyes. "I need to go," she said immediately. "Do what you need to do." With a grateful nod, Flynn wheeled his horse around. "Head back to the ranch," he instructed her. "Tell Mrs. Mullins what's happened and that I'll be back when I can." And then he was gone, galloping across the meadow with the ranch hand, leaving Theodora to make her way back alone. She returned to the ranch without incident, delivered Flynn's message to a worried Mrs. Mullins, and then found herself at loose ends, anxiety for Flynn's safety gnawing at her. Cattle rustling was dangerous business. She'd heard enough stories during her time at the Triple R to know that men often died in such confrontations. The day stretched endlessly, each hour increasing her concern. By nightfall, when there was still no sign of Flynn or the others, Theodora could barely concentrate on the mending Mrs. Mullins had given her to keep her hands busy. "They'll be back when they're back," Mrs. Mullins said gently, noting Theodora's frequent glances toward the window. "Flynn knows what he's doing, been handling trouble like this for years." "I just wish I knew if they were safe," Theodora confessed. Mrs. Mullins gave her a knowing look. "You care for him a great deal, don't you?" Theodora hesitated, then nodded, unable to deny what must have been obvious to the observant older woman. "I didn't expect to. When I came west, the last thing I wanted was entanglement, but Flynn is," she broke off, struggling to articulate her feelings. "Special," Mrs. Mullins finished for her. "Known that boy for 5 years now. Watched him grow from a troubled young man with nightmares that kept him pacing till dawn into the kind of person others can depend on." She patted Theodora's hand. "And I've seen the way he looks at you too." How does he look at me?" Theodora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Mullins smiled. "Like a man who's found something precious he never expected to find. Like a man afraid to hope too much but unable to stop himself from hoping anyway." The older woman's words set Theodora's heart racing. Could it be possible that Flynn felt the same inexplicable connection, the same growing affection that she did? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Theodora rushed to the window to see Flynn and several ranch hands riding into the yard, their figures silvered by moonlight. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. She wanted to run outside immediately, but restrained herself, aware that such an impulsive display of emotion would reveal more than she was ready to share publicly. Instead, she waited with Mrs. Mullins as the men dismounted and entered the house, bringing with them the smell of dust and sweat and the crisp night air. Flynn looked exhausted, a streak of dirt across one cheek and weariness in the set of his shoulders. But his eyes sought Theodora's immediately, and something in them relief, joy, unspoken feeling made her breath catch. "You got them?" Mrs. Mullins asked, already moving toward the kitchen to prepare food for the hungry men. "Got the cattle back," Flynn confirmed, removing his hat. "The rustlers split up when they realized we were on their trail. Chester's still tracking two of them with some of the men, but the stock is safe." His gaze hadn't left Theodora's face, and she felt the weight of unspoken words between them. Mrs. Mullins, perceptive as always, shooed the other ranch hands toward the kitchen, leaving Flynn and Theodora alone in the front room. "You're all right?" Theodora asked softly, resisting the urge to step closer, to touch him and reassure herself of his solid presence. Flynn nodded, a tired smile touching his lips. "Takes more than a few rustlers to get the best of me." He hesitated, then added, "I thought about you today, out there, wondered if you made it back to the ranch safely." "I did," she assured him, "and I was worried too about you." The admission hung in the air between them, simple words that carried the weight of deeper emotions. Flynn took a step toward her, then seemed to remember his disheveled state and stopped. "I should clean up before dinner," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Yes, you should," Theodora agreed, similarly rooted to the spot. Another moment passed, tension building like the air before a storm, until Flynn finally broke the spell. "Theodora, he stopped, searching for words. "These past 2 weeks, having you here, it's been." The front door banged open, startling them both. Chester stood in the doorway, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. "Flynn," the older man gasped. "They doubled back, ambushed us near the ridge. Pete's hit bad." "We got him in the wagon," but Flynn was in motion instantly, all personal matters forgotten in the face of crisis. "Where is he?" Coming up the road now. "Sent Miguel ahead to town for the doctor," but Theodora didn't wait to hear more. "Bring him inside," she instructed, already moving toward the kitchen to heat water. "Mrs. Mullins, we need clean linens, as many as you can find." The next hours passed in a blur of urgent activity. Pete was carried into the house, pale and bleeding from a gunshot wound to his shoulder. With the doctor still hours away, it fell to Theodora and Mrs. Mullins to clean and bandage the injury as best they could, following Flynn's instructions he had. It turned out, considerable experience with battlefield injuries from his time in the war. Theodora worked alongside him with steady hands and quiet efficiency, setting aside her own squeamishness in the face of Pete's need. When the bleeding was finally controlled and Pete resting as comfortably as possible, she stepped outside onto the porch for a moment of solitude, her hands and dress stained with blood despite her careful work. Flynn joined her minutes later, his own hands freshly washed but the worry still etched in his face. "You were remarkable in there," he said quietly. "Most women I know would have fainted at the sight." "I've assisted at charity hospitals in Boston," Theodora explained. "Though never with gunshot wounds, I admit." Flynn leaned against the porch railing, studying her face in the dim light from the windows. "Is there anything you can't do, Theodora Lawrence?" She gave a small, tired smile. "Many things, I'm sure. But tonight wasn't about ability so much as necessity." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the events of the day settling around them like dust after a storm. Before Chester arrived, Flynn finally said, his voice low, "I was trying to tell you something." Theodora's heart quickened. "Yes," Flynn took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "These weeks with you, they've changed something in me, changed how I see the future." He turned to face her fully. "I know you came west to be a teacher, to start fresh. And I have no right to ask you to change those plans. But I find myself hoping," he broke off, then continued more softly, "hoping that perhaps Ash Fork isn't the only place you might consider making your home." The implication of his words was unmistakable, and Theodora felt a surge of joy so intense it was almost painful. Yet caution held her back from responding too quickly. "Flynn, we've known each other such a short time," she began. "I know," he acknowledged. "And I'm not asking for promises or decisions tonight, just possibility, the chance to see if what's growing between us might become something lasting." His eyes, so blue even in the dim light, held her steadily. "I care for you, Theodora. More than I thought possible after knowing someone so briefly, and if you feel anything similar, I do," she admitted, the truth slipping out before she could contain it. "I care for you too, but I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of making another mistake, of trusting too quickly." She looked down at her hands, still bearing traces of blood despite her washing. "When Thomas broke our engagement, I felt such a fool. Everyone had seen the signs except me, and now to feel this way about someone I've known for mere weeks." Flynn stepped closer, gently tilting her chin up until she met his gaze again. "I'm not Thomas," he said simply. "And what's between us isn't something that can be measured in days or weeks. Some things you just know, deep down where it matters." The conviction in his voice, the tenderness in his touch, they broke through the last of Theodora's reservations. Moving on instinct rather than thought, she closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened as Flynn's arms came around her, drawing her closer. In that moment, all the doubts and fears that had haunted Theodora since leaving Boston seemed to dissolve. This felt right, felt true in a way her engagement to Thomas never had. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I pulled you from that river," he confessed. Theodora smiled. "Really, even when I was half drowned and bedraggled." "Especially then," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You were the most determined, half-drowned woman I'd ever seen, insisting on helping with the dishes when you could barely stand." They might have stayed there longer, lost in the newfound joy of their connection, had Mrs. Mullins not called from inside that the doctor had arrived. Reality intruded, reminding them of the injured man who needed attention and the duties that couldn't be set aside even for matters of the heart. "We should go in," Theodora said reluctantly. Flynn nodded, but before releasing her, he placed another quick kiss on her lips. "This conversation isn't over," he murmured. "Just postponed." The doctor, a gruff, competent man named Wilson, pronounced Pete lucky. The bullet had passed through his shoulder without hitting bone or major vessels, and with proper care, he should make a full recovery. "Keep the wound clean, change the bandages daily, and make sure he rests that arm," Dr. Wilson instructed as he packed his instruments. "I'll be back in a few days to check on him, but send for me sooner if fever sets in." After the doctor departed, the household finally settled for what remained of the night. Pete was installed in a downstairs bedroom where he could be easily monitored, and the other ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, leaving Flynn, Theodora, and Mrs. Mullins to snatch a few hours of rest before dawn. Despite her exhaustion, Theodora found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to the kiss she and Flynn had shared, to the feelings that had been acknowledged between them. What did it mean for her future? For the position in Ash Fork she'd traveled so far to take? And most importantly, what did she truly want now that her heart was pulling her in a direction she hadn't anticipated? Morning brought no clear answers, but did bring news from town. Miguel returned with word that the sheriff and a posse had caught up with the rustlers and apprehended them. The danger had passed, at least for now. The next week was busy with the aftermath of the rustling incident statements to the sheriff, reorganizing the herd, caring for Pete as he began his recovery. Through it all, Theodora and Flynn found little time for private conversation, though the glances they exchanged were laden with meaning, and the occasional brush of hands as they passed each other sent currents of awareness through Theodora that she couldn't ignore. Finally, 10 days after the confrontation with the rustlers, word came from Ash Fork that the school repairs were complete. The town was eager for Theodora to take up her position, with classes to begin the following Monday. Flynn delivered this news himself, finding Theodora in the garden where she was helping Mrs. Mullins harvest late summer vegetables. "Mayor Thornton sent a rider," he said, his expression carefully neutral. "The school's ready. He's asking when you'll be arriving, Mrs." Mullins, perceptive as always, made a show of remembering something she needed from the house and excused herself, leaving them alone among the neat rows of plants. Theodora set down her basket of tomatoes, her heart suddenly racing. The moment of decision had arrived sooner than she'd expected. "I see," she said quietly. Flynn stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Theodora, I meant what I said that night on the porch. I care for you deeply. These weeks having you here, they've been the happiest I can remember." He took a deep breath. "But I also understand that you came west with a purpose, a new beginning you planned for yourself. I won't stand in the way of that if it's what you truly want." Theodora looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and then, unexpectedly, captured her heart. The decision before her seemed monumental, the secure position she'd traveled so far to take, or the uncertain but promising future with Flynn. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if there was a way to honor both? My commitment to teaching and what's growing between us?" Flynn's expression lightened with hope. "What are you thinking? Ash Fork isn't so very far from the Triple R," Theodora pointed out. "A few hours' ride. I could take up my position as planned, fulfill my obligation to the town, but perhaps visit on weekends, or you could come to town." A slow smile spread across Flynn's face. "A compromise. For now," Theodora said, her own smile growing, "until we know for certain where this path leads us." Flynn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I believe I know already," he said softly. "But I'm willing to give you the time to be sure." 2 days later, Flynn escorted Theodora to Ash Fork, her few recovered belongings and new purchases packed in saddlebags. The school building stood at the edge of town, freshly repaired and painted, with living quarters on the second floor as promised. The mayor and several town council members greeted them warmly, eager to show Theodora her new workplace and home. As she toured the modest classroom and the small but comfortable apartment above it, Theodora felt a sense of rightness about her decision. Teaching was her calling, something she excelled at and enjoyed. Yet as she glanced at Flynn, who was speaking with the mayor about cattle prices, she knew that her heart had found another home as well, one she wasn't willing to relinquish. That evening, after the townspeople had dispersed and Theodora had settled into her new quarters, Flynn lingered at the doorway, reluctant to leave. "Will you be all right here?" he asked, glancing around the simple room with its narrow bed, small stove, and desk beneath the window. Theodora nodded, though a part of her already missed the warmth and companionship of the Triple R. "It's more than adequate for my needs, and the classroom is well equipped. The children will have everything necessary for their studies." Flynn stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. "I'm not asking about the accommodations, Theodora. I'm asking about you." The concern in his voice touched her deeply. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "This is what I came west to do, and knowing you're just a ride away, it makes all the difference." His expression softened. "I'll come on Saturday," he promised, "and every Saturday after if you'll have me." "I'll be waiting," she replied, her heart full of emotion. Flynn's goodbye kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of feelings that would only deepen with time. As Theodora watched him ride away, back toward the Triple R and the life he'd built there, she felt not the ache of separation, but the anticipation of reunion. The next morning, Theodora opened the schoolhouse doors to the children of Ash Fork, 23 pupils ranging in age from 5 to 16, all eager to meet their new teacher. As she called the roll and began assessing their varied levels of education, she found herself slipping easily into the role she'd trained for, her natural aptitude for teaching quickly establishing rapport with even the most reluctant students. By week's end, she had settled into a routine days filled with lessons, Evenings spent preparing for the next day's classes and writing detailed letters to her mother in Boston. Yet beneath it all ran an undercurrent of anticipation for Saturday and Flynn's promised visit. True to his word, he arrived just after midday, having ridden from the ranch at dawn. The sight of him dismounting outside the schoolhouse, hat in hand and a smile lighting his face as he spotted her in the doorway, sent a thrill of happiness through Theodora that confirmed what her heart already knew. "Miss Lawrence," he greeted her formally, aware of curious eyes watching from neighboring buildings. "I trust your first week of teaching went well." "Very well, thank you, Mr. Harrington," she replied with equal formality, though her eyes conveyed far more than her words. "Would you care to see the schoolroom? I've been told you contributed quite generously to its rebuilding." It was only later, after he had admired her classroom, and they had walked through town together, greeting neighbors and stopping at the general store for supplies, that they found a moment of privacy on the small balcony outside Theodora's quarters. "I've missed you," Flynn admitted, drawing her into his arms now that they were away from public view. "The ranch seems quiet without you there." "I've missed you too," Theodora confessed, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "The children are wonderful and the townspeople have been kind, but, Flynn prompted when she hesitated. Theodora looked up at him, honesty in her gaze. "But my heart keeps turning toward the north, toward a certain ranch and the man who runs it." Flynn's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then perhaps we should discuss a more permanent arrangement." Theodora's breath caught. "Flynn, are you asking you to marry me?" he finished for her. "Yes, Theodora Lawrence, I believe I am. I know it's soon by any proper standard, but out here life doesn't always wait for proper timing." His expression grew serious. "I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I pulled you from that river, and every day since has only deepened those feelings." Joy bubbled up inside Theodora, bright and irrepressible. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily, naturally. "And yes, it's soon, but it's also right. I've never been more certain of anything." Flynn's arms tightened around her, his kiss a seal to their mutual declaration. When they parted, both were smiling, the future suddenly clear and filled with promise. "What about my teaching position?" Theodora asked, practical concerns asserting themselves through her happiness. "I've made a commitment to the town." Flynn considered this. "The school term ends in December, doesn't it? That's 3 months away. You could fulfill your obligation for the term and we could be married at Christmas. And after we have options," Flynn said. "You could continue teaching if you wish. I could bring you to town on weekdays and take you home on weekends. Or perhaps Ash Fork might consider building a school closer to the Triple R, especially as more families settle in that area." The thoughtfulness of his suggestions, his willingness to accommodate her professional aspirations alongside their personal happiness, only confirmed for Theodora that she'd found a partner unlike any she could have imagined in Boston. "Christmas, then," she agreed, her heart light with joy. "A new beginning for both of us." Word of their engagement spread quickly through Ash Fork and the surrounding ranches. Most reactions were positive. Flynn was well respected in the community, and Theodora had already won many admirers through her dedication to her pupils. A few eyebrows raised at the brevity of their courtship, but as Mrs. Mullins sagely observed when she came to town to congratulate them, "Some folks take years to find what you two recognized in weeks. The heart knows its own business better than any calendar." The months leading to their December wedding were busy but joyful. Theodora threw herself into teaching, determined to give her students the best education possible in the time she had committed to them. Flynn divided his attention between ranch responsibilities and preparations for their shared future, adding a second bedroom to his house at the Triple R for visiting family. Improving the road between the ranch and town to make travel easier, ordering furniture and household items that would make the ranch house a proper home for his bride. They saw each other every weekend without fail, sometimes in town, sometimes at the ranch when Flynn could arrange for one of the female ranch hands' wives to chaperone Theodora's visit. Each reunion strengthened their bond, their conversations deepening their understanding of each other's hopes, fears, and dreams. Flynn shared more of his service in the Confederate cavalry during the war, the darker period afterward when grief and disillusionment had led him into company he now regretted. And finally, his journey west and the redemption he'd found in honest work and the vast, forgiving landscape of Arizona Territory. Theodora, in turn, revealed more about her life in Boston, her privileged upbringing, her father's death that had left her mother financially strained but still socially prominent, the engagement to Thomas that had seemed more a merger of compatible families than a love match, and the humiliation of his public betrayal. "I thought I knew what love was supposed to be," she told Flynn one evening as they sat on the porch of the Triple R, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Comfortable affection, shared interests, mutual respect. What I feel for you, it's so much more, so much deeper. It's like the difference between reading about the West in a book and actually standing in the middle of this vast, beautiful land." Flynn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I never expected to find you," he admitted. "After the war, after some of the things I did, I figured my chance at that kind of happiness was gone. Thought the best I could hope for was honest work and maybe some measure of peace." He turned to look at her, wonder in his eyes. "Then your wagon tips into the Verde River and suddenly the future looks different, brighter." "Providence," Theodora murmured, remembering how she'd viewed the teaching advertisement as divine intervention, though I could have done without the near drowning part. Flynn chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'll remind you of that providence next time you complain about Arizona summers." As December approached, preparations for the wedding intensified. Theodora wrote to her mother, explaining her unexpected change in plans and inviting her to attend the ceremony. The reply was cautiously supportive. Mrs. Lawrence couldn't travel such a distance in winter, but she sent her blessing along with a package containing Theodora's grandmother's wedding veil and a pair of pearl earrings that had been in the family for generations. "She wants to meet you in the spring," Theodora told Flynn after reading the letter. "She's planning to visit once the weather improves for travel." "I look forward to it," Flynn replied, though Theodora detected a hint of nervousness beneath his confident tone. "Think she'll approve of her daughter marrying a ranch foreman instead of a Boston gentleman?" Theodora smiled, touching his cheek gently. "She'll approve of my happiness, and once she meets you, she'll understand completely why I've chosen as I have." The wedding was set for December 20th, allowing time for a brief honeymoon trip to Prescott before Christmas. Theodora would complete the school term the week before, having already arranged with the town council for a new teacher to begin in January. As the day approached, a strange melancholy occasionally stole over Theodora despite her joy. She loved teaching, loved the sense of purpose it gave her, and the knowledge that she was making a difference in her students' lives. Giving it up, even for the happiness she knew awaited her at the Triple R, wasn't without some regret. Flynn, perceptive as always to her moods, noticed her quietness during one of his visits in early December. "Having second thoughts?" he asked directly, no accusation in his tone, only concern. "No," Theodora assured him quickly, "not about us, never about us. But something's troubling you," she sighed, appreciating his insight even as she struggled to articulate her feelings. "I love teaching," she finally said, "more than I expected to, actually. These children, I've grown so attached to them, to watching them learn and grow. The thought of saying goodbye," understanding dawned in Flynn's eyes. "You don't have to give it up entirely, you know. We discussed options." "I know," Theodora acknowledged. "But it won't be the same as having my own classroom every day." Flynn was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. "What if," he finally said, "we converted part of the old barn at the ranch? The western section isn't used much anymore, but it's solid. With some work, it could make a fine classroom." Theodora stared at him, hope rising. "A school at the Triple R," Flynn nodded, warming to the idea. "There are 5 families with children within riding distance who can't attend the town school regularly because of the distance." Pete's sister has 3 youngsters, the Morgans have 2, the Johnsons 4. Add in Chester's grandchildren when they visit, and you'd have a proper class. The possibility hadn't occurred to Theodora, but now that Flynn suggested it, she could see it clearly: a small but well-equipped classroom, children gathering each day to learn, the ability to combine her love of teaching with her life at the ranch. "Flynn Harrington," she said, emotion making her voice husky, "just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more, you find a way to prove me wrong." His smile was tender as he pulled her close. "Is that a yes to the Barnes School?" "It's a definite possibility," Theodora replied, her heart lighter than it had been in days. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect winter morning in the high desert. The ceremony was held in Ash Fork's small church, decorated for the occasion with evergreen boughs and white ribbons. The entire town turned out, along with the ranch hands and their families, filling every pew and spilling out onto the church steps. Theodora wore a simple gown of ivory silk, ordered from a dressmaker in Prescott, with her grandmother's veil secured by a comb of silver and pearl. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of Mayor Thornton, who had offered to give her away in her father's absence, her eyes were fixed on Flynn waiting at the altar. He stood tall and proud in a new suit, his usually wind-blown hair neatly combed, his expression one of wonder and joy as he watched his bride approach. In that moment, Theodora knew with absolute certainty that the path that had led her west through tragedy and unexpected turns had been leading her precisely where she was meant to be. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, adding personal promises to support each other's dreams and to face life's challenges as true partners. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn's kiss was a perfect blend of tenderness and passion, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, a festive affair with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Theodora and Flynn moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, both slightly dazed by the enormity of the step they had taken. "Mrs. Harrington," Flynn murmured during a quiet moment, testing the sound of her new name. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Theodora smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I think it sounds perfect." As the festivities continued around them, Theodora's thoughts drifted to the winding road that had brought her to this moment. From a broken engagement in Boston to a wagon tipping into a river in Arizona territory, from near drowning to the arms of a man who had not only saved her life, but had given her a new one, a life filled with love, purpose, and possibility. "Penny for your thoughts," Flynn said, noticing her contemplative expression. Theodora looked up at him, her heart full of gratitude and love. "I was just thinking about how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best ones. If my wagon hadn't tipped into the river that day, I would have found you anyway," Flynn said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not as dramatically, but our paths would have crossed. Some things are meant to be." As he led her onto the dance floor for another waltz, Theodora found herself believing him. Whatever force had guided their meeting, providence, fate, or simple chance, had led her to exactly where she belonged. In the arms of Flynn Harrington, looking toward a future as vast and promising as the Arizona sky. 5 years later, Theodora stood on the porch of their home at the Triple R, watching as Flynn taught their 3-year-old son, James, to sit on a pony for the first time. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, his dark hair so like his father's ruffling in the gentle spring breeze. Inside, their infant daughter, Elizabeth, slept peacefully in her cradle, born just 2 months earlier and already showing signs of her mother's determined spirit. The house had expanded along with their family, a new wing added 2 years after their wedding, with a larger kitchen, a dedicated study for Theodora's lesson planning, and rooms for the children. The Barnes School had become a reality within 6 months of their marriage, and it now served 12 children from the surrounding ranches and farms. 3 days a week, Theodora taught there, with the help of a young assistant she was training. The other 2 days, she devoted to her own children, and to writing educational materials specifically designed for frontier schools, a project that had gained attention from educators as far away as Denver. Flynn, meanwhile, had become not just the foreman but a partner in the Triple R when Richard Reynolds decided to remain permanently in the East. The arrangement suited everyone. Flynn had the authority to implement his vision for the ranch. Reynolds received regular profits without the burden of management, and the Triple R prospered under Flynn's careful stewardship. Life wasn't without its challenges. The first year of their marriage had brought drought, threatening the herd and straining their resources. The following spring, an outbreak of fever had swept through Ash Fork, claiming several lives and keeping Theodora busy helping the town's overworked doctor. Last winter, a blizzard had isolated the ranch for nearly 2 weeks, forcing them to ration supplies until the roads cleared. Yet through each difficulty, their partnership had only strengthened, their commitment to each other and to the life they were building together deepening with each passing season. Theodora's mother had visited the summer after their wedding, initially skeptical of her daughter's choice but won over by Flynn's obvious devotion and the evident happiness of the couple. She now made the journey west annually, delighting in her grandchildren and in seeing her once conventional daughter thriving in this unconventional life. "Mama, look," James called, his small hands gripping the pony's mane as Flynn led the animal in a slow circle. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, darling," Theodora called back, her heart swelling with love for her little family. "You're doing wonderfully." Flynn glanced up at her, a smile spreading across his still handsome face. 5 years of marriage hadn't dimmed the spark between them. If anything, their love had grown richer and deeper with shared experiences, challenges overcome together, and the joy of raising their children. As the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, painting the landscape in the vibrant colors that had first captivated Theodora when she arrived in Arizona territory, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The wagon that had tipped into the Verde River had carried not just her belongings but her old life, her old expectations. The current that had threatened to drown her had instead swept her toward an unexpected shore, toward Flynn, toward home. Later that evening, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Theodora and Flynn sat together on the porch swing, a blanket draped over their laps against the cooling night air. Flynn's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, his presence a constant source of strength and comfort. "James is going to be a fine horseman," Flynn commented, pride evident in his voice. "Has a natural seat just like his mother." Theodora laughed softly. "His mother, who couldn't even mount a horse without help when she first arrived, I think any skill he has comes directly from you." "You learned quickly," Flynn reminded her. "Remember that first cattle drive you joined 3 months after our wedding? Even Chester was impressed, and he's not easily impressed." The memory brought a smile to Theodora's face. She had insisted on participating in the spring roundup, determined to understand every aspect of ranch life. Despite her sore muscles and sunburned nose, it had been an exhilarating experience, one that had cemented her love for this land and this life. "I had a good teacher," she said, leaning her head against Flynn's shoulder. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the corral, the chorus of crickets in the surrounding grassland. "Any regrets?" Flynn asked suddenly, his voice thoughtful. "About leaving Boston, about the path your life has taken?" Theodora considered the question seriously, though she already knew the answer. "Not one," she said with conviction. "Everything I might have had in Boston: security, social position, comfort seems pale compared to what I've found here." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "What about you? Any regrets about fishing a half-drowned schoolteacher out of the Verde River?" Flynn's laugh was low and warm. "Only that I didn't have a proper introduction ready. Madam, I'm Flynn Harrington, and I'll be saving your life and stealing your heart today." "Very smooth," Theodora teased, poking him gently in the ribs. "Though I think you managed the heart-stealing part quite effectively, even without the formal introduction." Flynn captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm with a tenderness that still made her pulse quicken after 5 years of marriage. Best impulse I ever followed, diving into that river. Theodora thought of the day that had changed everything, the terror of the wagon tipping, the cold rush of water, the strong arms that had pulled her to safety. How close she had come to a very different fate, and how miraculous it seemed that catastrophe had instead led to such happiness. "I love you, Flynn Harrington," she said softly, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. "Thank you for pulling me to shore." Flynn's arms tightened around her, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the passion and promise of their first, yet was enriched by the years they had shared and the life they had built together. "I love you too, Theodora Harrington, always will." As they sat together beneath the vast Arizona sky, the Triple R quiet around them and their children sleeping peacefully inside, Theodora knew with absolute certainty that this man, this home, this life was exactly where she belonged. The river that had nearly claimed her life had instead carried her to her destiny, and for that, she would be forever grateful.